Bring her to me, the Alpha King ordered after seeing the young Omega dance while cleaning. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. Jackson, the Alpha King, was a man of command and authority, ruling over his kingdom with unwavering strength. His every step exuded dominance, and his gaze alone could silence a room full of people. Despite his intimidating exterior, there was something behind his sharp eyes, a hidden curiosity that few got to see. But today, something unusual caught his attention. It wasn't a matter of politics, nor a strategy to conquer. It was a simple, unexpected sight. A young Omega, a woman named Emma, cleaning the grand hall of the castle. Jackson had just finished an exhausting meeting with his advisors when he heard soft music drifting from the hallway. His curiosity piqued. He followed the sound until he reached the door of the grand hall. Through the slightly open door, he saw Emma. She was dancing, unaware of anyone's gaze, lost in the rhythm of the music as she swept the floors. Her movements were graceful, fluid, and utterly captivating, each step a blend of elegance and freedom. Jackson paused, his heart beating faster than he cared to admit. The sight of her, so pure in her simplicity, took him by surprise. Emma had no idea that her quiet, carefree dance had caught the attention of someone so powerful. She was just going about her usual work, a humble Omega who never imagined her actions would be noticed by the king himself. But Jackson had seen enough. His gaze softened, though his voice remained steady as he ordered the guards stationed nearby. "Bring her to me," he commanded, his tone leaving no room for debate. The guards, having been in the presence of the Alpha King for years, knew better than to question his authority. They immediately moved to fulfill his order, unaware of the reason behind it. Emma, still unaware of the unfolding events, continued her cleaning. But in a matter of minutes, her life was about to change in a way she could never have anticipated. Emma was still lost in her dance when the guards entered the grand hall, their footsteps echoing against the marble floor. She barely heard them approaching, too absorbed in the rhythm of her movements. The music, the sweeping of the broom, the quietness of the room, everything felt like a peaceful escape for her. But then, she turned around and froze. The guards stood just inside the door, their stern faces making it clear they had come with a purpose. One of them stepped forward. "You are needed in the king's chambers," he said, his voice emotionless. Emma blinked in confusion, her heart suddenly racing. She was just a cleaning servant, an Omega who had never been called upon by anyone important, let alone the king himself. "The king? What for?" she asked hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. The guard's expression softened, but only for a moment. "It's not for us to question. You must come with us," he replied, stepping aside to allow her to pass. Emma's mind raced as she followed them down the long hallway, her thoughts a blur. Why would the king want to see her? What had she done to attract his attention? She had no answers, only questions. Her stomach twisted with nerves. Jackson, the Alpha King, was known for his formidable presence, his commanding voice, and his cold demeanor. She had heard stories of how people trembled in his presence, how he demanded respect with just a look. The thought of facing him made her pulse quicken. What if she embarrassed herself in front of him? What if he was angry with her for some unknown reason? The guards led her to the king's private chambers, where the door stood open, and Jackson's form loomed in the center of the room. His dark eyes met hers as she entered, and for a moment, Emma felt a chill run down her spine. He was even more imposing up close. His presence filled the room, and yet, there was an air of calmness about him that made her feel small and unsure. She stood at the threshold, unsure of whether to step forward or remain where she was. Jackson did not speak immediately. Instead, his gaze lingered on her, studying her, with a curiosity that made Emma's heart race. She shifted nervously under his stare, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. Finally, Jackson's voice broke the silence. "You are the one who was dancing in the hall," he said, his tone neutral. Emma nodded, barely able to find her voice. "Yes, Your Majesty," she replied quietly. He seemed to consider her answer for a moment before continuing. "Why were you dancing?" he asked, his question simple but carrying an unexpected weight. Emma's eyes widened. She hadn't expected to be questioned about such a trivial thing. I was just cleaning, and the music," she trailed off, not sure how to explain herself. Jackson tilted his head slightly, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming on his lips. "You seem different," he remarked, his voice softer now. "Most people would not dance in the king's halls, especially without permission." Emma felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't know how to respond. She had never danced for anyone before, let alone for the king. She had simply gotten lost in the music, in the moment. It was a part of her, something she did when no one was watching. "I didn't mean any disrespect, Your Majesty," she said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was just something I do." Jackson studied her for a long moment, and Emma could feel the weight of his gaze, like he was trying to read her very soul. Then, without warning, he spoke again. "You may go," he said, his tone suddenly curt. Emma blinked, surprised by the sudden dismissal. "Go," she repeated, her voice soft with confusion. Jackson nodded once. "Yes, but remember this moment, Emma. There is something about you that is intriguing." His words hung in the air as she hesitated, unsure of whether to leave or stay. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said, bowing her head respectfully. She turned to leave, but as she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger than she could ever imagine. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed after her encounter with Jackson. As she returned to her duties, her mind kept wandering back to that moment in the king's chambers. The way he had looked at her, as if he was seeing something more than just a humble Omega. Her hands trembled slightly as she dusted the shelves in the castle's library, her thoughts racing. Why had he called her in the first place? Was it really just because of the dance? It seemed so trivial, but something about his words lingered in her mind, that he found her intriguing. She wondered what he meant by that. It wasn't long before Emma was summoned again. This time, it was an official request. She was to attend the evening banquet, an event where the most important figures in the kingdom would gather. The invitation came with an air of formality, yet Emma couldn't shake the unease that settled in her stomach. She had never been to such an event, let alone been invited by the king himself. Her mind raced with questions as she prepared for the evening. What should she wear? What would she say? The idea of facing so many important people, let alone the king, made her feel small and insignificant. But still, she couldn't refuse. The invitation had come directly from Jackson, and she knew she had no choice but to obey. The evening arrived, and Emma found herself standing before a mirror in her modest room, staring at her reflection. She had chosen a simple gown, nothing too extravagant, but still elegant in its own way. The soft blue fabric contrasted with the dark, rich wood of the room's furnishings. She adjusted the straps and took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. When the guards arrived to escort her, they guided her to the grand hall where the banquet was being held. The sight that greeted her was nothing short of breathtaking. The hall was filled with people in lavish attire, the air thick with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Emma felt like an outsider, her simple gown standing in stark contrast to the ornate dresses and suits around her. She barely knew where to look, unsure of how to behave in such a grand setting. As she entered, all eyes seemed to turn toward her. It felt as though the room had gone silent for a moment, though she knew that wasn't the case. But it sure felt like it. And then, she saw him. Jackson stood at the head of the room, as commanding and regal as ever. His presence seemed to fill the entire hall. He wasn't just a man, he was the king, the alpha, the leader of all. His gaze locked with hers, and Emma felt a wave of heat rise to her cheeks. She quickly looked away, feeling exposed under his intense stare. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to do. Should she approach him? Should she wait for him to speak to her? Her heart raced as she took a tentative step forward, only to have the crowd part for her as she made her way toward Jackson. The murmurs of conversation began again, but Emma couldn't focus on anything except the overwhelming presence of the king. Jackson's eyes followed her as she approached. There was something different in his gaze this time. It wasn't just curiosity, it was something deeper. Emma's heart pounded as she finally reached him, and the noise of the banquet seemed to fade into the background. "Emma," Jackson said, his voice calm but strong, like the sound of a distant thunderstorm. "You look different tonight." His words were simple, but the way he said them made Emma's pulse quicken. She swallowed, trying to steady her breath. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she replied, her voice soft. Jackson's eyes never left her as he gestured for her to stand beside him. "Come, stand with me. The evening is just beginning." As Emma moved to stand beside him, she felt the weight of his presence beside her. She had never been this close to him before, and now, in the midst of so many people, she couldn't help but feel small. But there was something oddly comforting about his proximity, something that made her feel like she belonged here, even if only for this moment. As the banquet continued around them, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. Jackson's attention was unwavering, and she couldn't help but wonder what he truly saw in her, what had sparked his interest in such a quiet, unassuming Omega. The night stretched on, and though Emma was surrounded by people, she felt as though she were the only one in the room with the king. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of something far greater than she could have ever imagined. The night unfolded like a dream, but it wasn't a peaceful dream for Emma. As the banquet continued, she found herself standing beside Jackson, trying her best to remain calm amidst the sea of guests. Every now and then, his gaze would shift toward her, and she could feel the weight of his attention like a silent command. His presence, though quiet, dominated the room. People around them spoke in hushed tones, as if trying to decipher the strange connection between the king and the young Omega. Emma could feel their eyes on her, but she tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the king. Despite the grand celebration, it felt as though time had slowed down just for them. "You seem uneasy," Jackson observed after a few moments, his voice a soft murmur against the noise of the party. Emma looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat at the way his gaze softened when it met hers. "It's just, I've never been around so many people before, Your Majesty," she admitted quietly, her voice barely audible over the laughter and chatter in the background. Jackson studied her for a moment, his brow furrowing slightly. "You do not have to be afraid," he said, his tone reassuring, though still authoritative. "You are here because I asked for you to be here. You belong in this room, Emma. Do not doubt that." His words, though simple, made Emma's chest tighten. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't just a servant or a lowly Omega, but someone who had been chosen for a purpose. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she replied, feeling a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She couldn't understand why he had singled her out in such a way, but the way he spoke made her wonder if there was more to this story than she realized. As the evening wore on, the guests slowly began to gather around the long tables, where food and drink were being served. The music shifted to something softer, and the energy of the room became more intimate. Jackson's attention remained fixed on Emma, and she began to notice that, while others mingled and laughed, he never once looked away. There was something magnetic about his presence, something that drew her in despite the unease she felt. "Would you like to sit?" Jackson asked suddenly, breaking the silence between them. Emma blinked, surprised by the offer. "Sit, Your Majesty," she repeated, a bit flustered. Jackson nodded. "Yes, join me for the feast." It wasn't an order, but it wasn't quite a request either. It was more of a suggestion, though one that Emma knew she couldn't refuse. As they moved to a nearby table, the other guests seemed to part around them, as if giving Jackson and Emma the space they needed. The moment she sat down beside him, Emma felt a strange mix of nervousness and warmth. It was as if the entire room had vanished, leaving just the two of them in a world of their own. Jackson glanced at her, his eyes gleaming with something unreadable. "You are more than what you seem, Emma," he said softly, his words like a whisper meant only for her. "I have seen many in my life, but there is something about you that stands out." Emma's heart raced again at his words. "What do you mean, Your Majesty?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jackson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a glass of wine and took a slow sip. "You are not like the others," he said finally, his gaze never leaving her. "There is a strength in you that is hidden, something you have yet to discover." Emma wasn't sure how to respond. She had always been taught to be quiet, to stay out of the way, to be obedient. She had never thought of herself as strong, but there was something in Jackson's voice, in the way he looked at her, that made her wonder if he saw something she didn't. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said again, this time with more confidence. I don't know what to say. Jackson smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she had seen from him all evening. You don't need to say anything, Emma. Just be yourself. For a moment, Emma was speechless. She had never been told that before, especially not by someone like Jackson. The night continued to pass in a blur of conversations, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. But through it all, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken a turn. She had been brought here for a reason, and she couldn't help but wonder what that reason was. Jackson's attention remained on her, and every now and then, he would say something that made her heart race. She had the strange feeling that, no matter what happened next, she was no longer just an Omega in the castle. She was something more, and Jackson knew it. The following days passed in a blur for Emma. After the banquet, things were different. She had noticed it the moment she returned to her duties. Her every step seemed to be under the watchful eyes of Jackson. His gaze lingered on her more than ever before, though he said little. It wasn't just his physical presence that affected her. It was the way he looked at her, like she was more than just an Omega, more than just a servant. She wasn't used to this attention, and it unsettled her. Every time their paths crossed in the halls, Emma felt a strange heat in her chest, a mix of nervousness and something else, something she couldn't quite place. Despite the uncertainty, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. One afternoon, she was tasked with cleaning the royal garden. It was one of the more peaceful duties, as the garden was secluded from the rest of the castle. Emma enjoyed the quiet solitude, the scent of flowers, and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. As she worked, her thoughts wandered. She wondered about Jackson, about the words he had said to her at the banquet. There is a strength in you that is hidden. What did that mean? Was she really strong? The thought seemed absurd, but the more she pondered, the more it seemed like he saw something in her that she couldn't see herself. Her train of thought was interrupted when she heard footsteps approaching. She quickly turned to find Jackson standing at the edge of the garden, watching her. He had an unreadable expression on his face, but there was a hint of something in his eyes that made Emma's pulse quicken. Your Majesty, she said, startled. What are you doing here? Jackson smiled slightly, though there was a certain intensity to his gaze. I wanted to speak with you, he said, his voice calm and steady. Emma felt her stomach flip at the idea of speaking with him alone. She had grown used to his presence in large gatherings, but one-on-one conversations with him were a different matter. Of course, she said, her voice a bit shaky as she stood up straighter. Jackson motioned for her to join him by the edge of the garden. I've been watching you, Emma, he began, his tone measured. Not just in the halls, but here too. There is something about you that I cannot ignore. Something more than the other Omegas. Emma felt a flush spread across her cheeks at his words. She wanted to speak, to ask him what he meant, but her words caught in her throat. Jackson's gaze softened as if he could sense her hesitation. You are different, he continued. You have a quiet strength, a resilience that I find intriguing. I have seen many Omegas in my time, but none quite like you. Emma lowered her gaze, unsure of how to respond. She had never thought of herself as strong. She had always been taught to be obedient, to serve without question. But Jackson's words made her wonder if perhaps there was more to her than she realized. I don't know what to say, Your Majesty, she finally murmured. I'm just me. Jackson studied her for a long moment, as if searching for something in her eyes. That's the problem, Emma, he said softly. You don't see yourself the way others see you. You are more than what you think. You have the potential to be much more, if only you believed in it. Emma felt a strange stir in her chest at his words. She had never thought of herself as capable of anything other than the tasks assigned to her. But Jackson made her question that, made her wonder if she could be something else, something stronger. I don't know if I can change that, Your Majesty, she whispered. Jackson's smile was small but warm, his expression gentle. You don't have to change who you are, Emma. You just need to realize your worth. It's already inside you. For a moment, there was silence between them, the only sound the soft breeze rustling through the trees. Emma didn't know what to make of what he was saying. She had never imagined a life beyond servitude, beyond being an Omega. But Jackson made her see that maybe, just maybe, she could be something more. He turned to leave, but paused, glancing back at her. I will be watching you, Emma, he said quietly. I want to see how you grow. His words hung in the air as he walked away, leaving Emma standing alone in the garden. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the verge of something bigger than she could ever have imagined. Emma spent the next few days with a heavy heart, unable to shake Jackson's words from her mind. You are more than what you think. You have the potential to be much more, if only you believed in it. His words replayed over and over in her head, echoing through her thoughts like a soft whisper. She found herself looking at the world around her in a new way, trying to see herself as Jackson had seen her, as someone with strength and value. It was a difficult concept to grasp. She had always been taught to stay in the background, to remain invisible, to serve without drawing attention to herself. But now, for the first time, she wondered if there was more to her than just that. It was early one morning when Emma was tasked with cleaning the king's study. She had done this many times before, but today, something felt different. The room was quiet and still, the only sound the soft scraping of her broom against the floor. As she worked, she couldn't help but glance up at the shelves of books that lined the walls. She had always been fascinated by the stories and knowledge contained within them, but she had never allowed herself the luxury of curiosity. Omegas didn't have time for learning or self-reflection. They had duties to fulfill, tasks to complete. Yet, today, as she swept the dust away from the king's desk, her eyes fell on a book resting on the edge, its spine worn with age. Without thinking, she reached for it. It was a thick, leather-bound volume, its pages yellowed with time. She hesitated for a moment, then opened it. The first few pages were filled with tales of history, stories of great leaders, battles, and victories. Emma's fingers traced the words, her mind slowly absorbing the information. She didn't know why, but something about this book called to her, as if it held secrets meant just for her. As she flipped through the pages, the sound of the door opening startled her. She quickly slammed the book shut and stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. Jackson stood in the doorway, his piercing gaze locked on her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emma felt a wave of panic rise within her. Had he seen her? Had he known what she was doing? But Jackson didn't seem angry. Instead, he walked into the room, his presence as imposing as ever. I see you found my favorite book, he said, his voice smooth, though there was an unreadable quality to it. Emma's face flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I didn't mean to intrude. She trailed off, unsure of what to say. Jackson raised a hand, silencing her. There is no need to apologize, he said. In fact, I'm glad you found it. This book holds many lessons I think you could benefit from. Emma's heart skipped a beat at his words. Me, Your Majesty? She asked, surprised. Jackson nodded. You have a curiosity in you, Emma. I've seen it. You want to know more, to understand things that most people would overlook. That's the kind of mind that will take you far. Emma felt a surge of warmth in her chest, but it was quickly followed by uncertainty. But I'm just an Omega, she murmured, almost to herself. Jackson stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. An Omega is no less capable than anyone else, he said firmly. You have just as much potential as anyone in this kingdom, Emma. It's all about realizing it. His words struck her like a revelation. She had never thought of herself as anything more than a servant, someone meant to obey orders without question. But Jackson was showing her a different world, one where she could be more. I'll leave you to your work, he said softly, stepping back toward the door. But remember what I've said. Believe in yourself. Don't be afraid to seek knowledge, to grow. As Jackson left the room, Emma stood there, still holding the book in her hands. His words lingered in her mind like a light that had just begun to shine in the darkness. She was an Omega, yes, but maybe, just maybe, there was more to her than she had ever imagined. The possibilities suddenly seemed endless. The idea of growing, of learning, of finding her strength, filled her with a new sense of purpose. She had never been given the chance to dream before, but now, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of person she could become, if only she dared to try. Days turned into weeks, and Emma's world slowly began to change. Jackson's words about strength and potential echoed in her mind, and she found herself thinking about them more and more. The weight of her own limitations, the ones she had placed on herself for so long, began to feel like something she could shed. She had started reading the book Jackson had mentioned, and with each page, her understanding of the world expanded. She had never realized how much knowledge was out there, waiting to be discovered. Her curiosity, which she had kept hidden for so long, began to blossom. She read late into the night, her eyes growing tired but her mind sharp with the excitement of learning. In the days that followed, Emma noticed subtle changes in how she interacted with the world around her. Her steps felt lighter, her posture more confident. The simple act of walking through the castle halls felt different now. She was no longer just a shadow in the background. She was someone with purpose, someone who was beginning to believe in herself. It was on one of these days, while she was polishing the silver in the dining hall, that Jackson approached her again. He seemed to be watching her more closely now, his gaze always lingering just a bit longer than before. This time, when he spoke, his voice was gentle, but there was something more, something almost expectant. "You seem different, Emma," he said, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her. Emma paused for a moment, her heart skipping a beat. She hadn't realized how much she had changed, how much she had grown. I feel different, Your Majesty," she replied softly. "I've been learning, and I don't know. I just feel like there's more to me than I realized." Jackson nodded, his lips curving into a slight smile. "I knew you had it in you," he said, his tone warm but still commanding. "You've always had the potential to be more, Emma. But now, you're starting to see it yourself." His words made Emma's chest swell with a strange sense of pride. She had never imagined that Jackson, the Alpha King, would take notice of her in such a way. It was more than just his attention. It was his belief in her, a belief that had begun to seep into her own heart. "You have made progress," he continued, taking a step closer to her. "I can see it in your eyes. There's a strength in you now, a quiet confidence. It suits you." Emma's cheeks flushed at his praise, and she found herself looking down, unsure of how to respond. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice filled with a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Jackson paused for a moment, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want you to know that I'm watching you, Emma," he said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "Not just as the king, but as someone who sees the potential in you. I believe in you, and I want you to keep pushing forward. Keep learning, keep growing. You're capable of far more than you think." Emma's heart raced at his words. She had never felt so seen, so understood, and the weight of his belief in her settled deep inside her. It was a gift she hadn't expected, but one she would hold close to her heart. "I will, Your Majesty," she promised, her voice firm with determination. Jackson gave her a brief, approving nod before turning to leave. "Good," he said over his shoulder. "I'll be watching your progress, Emma. I expect great things from you." As he disappeared down the hallway, Emma stood there for a moment, her heart full of emotion. She had always lived her life in the shadows, never daring to dream of anything more than what was expected of her. But now, thanks to Jackson's belief in her, she felt as though she could reach for something greater. She wasn't just an Omega anymore. She was someone with the power to shape her own future. The days following Jackson's encouragement were transformative for Emma. She found herself waking up earlier, with a newfound sense of purpose. No longer just a servant, she was beginning to see herself differently, as though the weight of her past had been lifted just slightly. The castle, once a vast and impersonal place where she felt small, now seemed full of possibility. She carried herself with more confidence, and even the other servants noticed the change. Emma no longer moved through the halls with her head down. Instead, she walked with purpose, her eyes lifted, her posture straighter. The book that Jackson had introduced to her became her companion. She read it every chance she got, sometimes sitting by the window in the quiet hours of the morning, letting the light pour in as she absorbed the lessons of history, leadership, and strength. Each page she turned seemed to fuel a fire inside her, one she hadn't realized was burning all along. Emma began to ask questions she had never dared ask before. She started speaking to the scholars in the castle library, learning more about the world beyond the walls of the castle. She wanted to understand everything, from the ancient battles to the intricacies of diplomacy. Every new piece of knowledge she gained filled her with a sense of pride, like she was uncovering a new layer of herself she had never known existed. Her new confidence did not go unnoticed by Jackson. He seemed to observe her more closely than ever before. He would often pass by her, his gaze lingering just a moment longer than necessary, as if waiting to see if she would react. Emma had grown accustomed to his presence, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that he saw more in her than anyone else ever had. One afternoon, Jackson approached her while she was organizing some papers in the castle study. He stood in the doorway, watching her for a long moment before speaking. "I see that you've been busy, Emma," he said, his tone both approving and curious. Emma glanced up, her heart skipping a beat. She had been so caught up in her work that she hadn't realized how much time had passed. "Yes, Your Majesty," she replied, her voice steady, though she could feel the heat rising in her cheeks. "I've been reading, learning as much as I can." Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I can tell. I've been watching you," he said, taking a step closer. Emma's breath caught in her throat, but she kept her composure. "You've made remarkable progress," he continued. "I knew you had potential, but now I see the depth of it. You're no longer just a servant, Emma. You are a woman who knows her worth." His words felt like a weight settling on her shoulders, but in the best possible way. For the first time, she felt truly seen, truly acknowledged for the person she was becoming. "I never imagined this for myself," Emma said softly, looking down at her hands. "I never thought I could be more than just what I was." Jackson gently lifted her chin with his hand, his touch surprisingly tender. "You are not what you were, Emma," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are who you choose to be." His words were like a spark igniting something deep within her. Emma felt a surge of gratitude toward him, a deep, overwhelming sense that she owed him more than just her thanks. He had helped her see that she could be more. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jackson's expression softened. "You have earned it, Emma," he said. "Now, the real test begins. I want to see how far you can go, how much you can grow. You are destined for more than this castle, but it's up to you to choose the path." His words left her breathless. She had never thought of herself as someone with a future beyond the walls of the castle, but now she wasn't so sure. There was something out there, something waiting for her if she was brave enough to reach for it. Jackson's gaze held hers for a long moment before he nodded. "Keep moving forward," he said, his tone soft but firm. "I'll be watching, Emma, and I know you'll surprise us all." As he turned and walked away, Emma stood there for a moment, her heart racing. She felt something stir inside her, something new, something powerful. The world outside seemed so much bigger than it had just days ago. And now, she was ready to face it. Whatever path she chose, she knew one thing for sure. It was hers to walk. And Jackson's belief in her would be the light that guided her forward. The weeks passed, and Emma felt the weight of Jackson's words pushing her forward. She could no longer ignore the potential he had seen in her. Every day, she worked harder, learned more, and embraced the woman she was becoming. The castle no longer felt like just a place of servitude. It had transformed into a space where she was beginning to carve out her own future. Emma's confidence grew with each passing day, and so did her ability to think critically. She had started attending lessons with some of the scholars at the castle, asking questions she had never dared to ask before. She learned about politics, about leadership, and about the history of the kingdom. Slowly, she began to see the bigger picture, the intricate world outside the castle walls that she had never considered before. It was one afternoon when Emma was in the garden, sitting by the fountain, her book open in front of her, that Jackson found her again. He had been watching her from a distance, noting the changes in her with a quiet satisfaction. He had seen her grow from the timid Omega who had once looked at the floor whenever he entered a room, to someone who now held her head high and spoke with confidence. Emma didn't notice him at first, lost in the pages of the book, but when she finally looked up, their eyes met. She smiled softly, her heart skipping a beat at the sight of him. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice calm, though it trembled just slightly. Jackson smiled back, his gaze warm. "I see you're hard at work," he remarked, glancing at the book in her hands. "Yes, Your Majesty," Emma replied. "I've been learning. There's so much to understand, so much to know." Jackson stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her. "And what have you learned, Emma?" he asked. Emma hesitated for a moment, then closed the book and looked at him. "I've learned that there is more to life than what I've known, that there is strength in knowledge and in understanding the world around me," she said, her voice steady now. Jackson nodded, clearly impressed. "You've come a long way in such a short time," he said. "I knew you had it in you." Emma felt a rush of warmth at his words. For so long, She had doubted herself. She had thought she was meant to be nothing more than a servant, someone who had no say in the world beyond the walls of the castle. But now, with Jackson's guidance and her own growing determination, she had begun to see that she could be more. "Thank you, Your Majesty," Emma said softly, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you for everything you've done for me." Jackson's expression softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, an unexpected gesture of encouragement. "You don't need to repay me," he said gently. "I saw the potential in you from the start. All I've done is help you realize what was always inside you." Emma looked up at him, her heart filled with a mixture of admiration and gratitude. Jackson was more than just the king now. He was someone who had shown her what she was capable of. "You have the power to change your future, Emma," Jackson said, his voice firm and sure. "The world is full of opportunities. It's yours to take if you're brave enough." Emma felt a new fire ignite inside her at his words. She was no longer afraid of the world outside the castle. She was no longer the quiet, uncertain Omega who hid in the background. With Jackson's belief in her and her own growing strength, she knew that she could face whatever came her way. "I will, Your Majesty," she said, her voice resolute. "I will be brave, and I will take what is mine." Jackson smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "I know you will, Emma. You're ready." And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emma standing by the fountain, her heart full of purpose. She was ready to take on the world, to live the life she had always dreamed of, and to become the woman she was always meant to be. Jackson had given her the tools to change her destiny. Now, it was up to her to seize the opportunity. Emma watched him leave, her heart racing with excitement for what was to come. The future was hers, and she was ready to embrace it with open arms.